Hello and welcome to this 2020 social distancing version of Sandy Spring Friends Meditations on the Meaning of the Cross. This has been a tradition that we've had for about 15 years. I'm not sure exactly what year we started, but we wanted to continue with this tradition and also share it with other people. We are a Quaker community in Sandy Spring, Maryland, which is in Montgomery County. And this is the first time we've done anything like this. So I hope you get something out of this. During 9th month, 1994, a group of friends from the spiritual formation program of the Baltimore Yearly Meeting was attending a weekend retreat at the Priestfield Pastoral Center near Middle Way, West Virginia. I was asked by several people if I knew why a series of carvings were arranged along a path through the woods. As I fumbled for a friendly explanation of the Catholic devotional called The Stations of the Cross, someone said, "Maybe you could take us around and show us." As a group of people made its way through the path, someone suggested that I undertake a Quaker version of the stations, emphasizing Quaker themes in a non-liturgical form that might focus friends' attention on the last hours of and death of Jesus. Although I was simultaneously flattered and shocked, thinking that it was impossible, I later agreed to make an attempt. The result is in your hands, dear reader. I have applied for permission to quote from the books mentioned in the text. Copyright laws forbid any reproduction of this text in any manner without permission. No offense is meant toward anyone's faith or view of the life or death of Jesus. This is simply one person's attempt to think about the crucifixion from a non-ideological point of view. As I understand it, George Fox rejected any form of faith-based solely on any set of ideas, as he called them, notions. This version of the Stations of the Cross is meant to provide material for personal reflection from one human standpoint. I am particularly grateful for the introduction given me by my teachers, Roman Catholic, Anglican, and Quaker. The shortcomings, of course, are my own, and that was written by John Skane Mason during Lent of 1995. This is our introduction to the Stations of the Cross Quaker version. Jesus of Nazareth was a relatively young man when he was tortured to death for a political crime of which he was innocent. The execution was carried out by Roman soldiers acting on the orders of the Roman governor of an occupied land. This form of execution was, for the most part, reserved for slaves, revolutionaries, or terrorists. It was considered so vicious that most civilized persons thought it unspeakable and looked the other way. The victim was usually so severely beaten beforehand that some died before the actual crucifixion. The purpose of the flogging was to make the victim so weak that he could not resist. The victim was then stripped in order to maximize his public shame. Charitable persons were allowed to give drugged wine to the victim in order to ease his pain. The victim was then tied or nailed to a piece of wood and hoisted aloft to wait in the hot sun, where the insects also played their part. In some cases, the victim was crucified upside down, or else his legs were thrown over the crossbar with his head hanging down. The excruciating pain was heightened by the fact that, at least initially, small movements were possible, but neither rest nor movement brought any relief. In a matter of hours, or sometimes days, Death was caused either by loss of blood or by suffocation. During the late Middle Ages, the Franciscans popularized a devotional exercise which was brought to Europe by returning pilgrims. This devotion probably arose out of the practice, attested from an early date, of pilgrims at Jerusalem following the traditional route from Pilate's house to Calvary, and wishing to reproduce a similar devotion at home. In many Roman Catholic and Anglican churches, the series of 14 carvings or pictures are arranged along the interior walls of the building so that the faithful may review the incidents from the last journey of Jesus as he went from Pilate's house to his interment. This devotion has been particularly popular in Lent and Holy Week, when people in a group visited the stations in order, reciting prayers and meditating on each incident. We will have an opportunity to make the stations, as they say, using a text which was inspired by the Catholic tradition, but has been considerably modernized and adapted to Quaker understandings and sensibilities. There will be periods of silence for contemplation between the readings. First station. Jesus is condemned to death. When Pilate, the Roman governor, saw that he could do nothing to appease the mob which was beginning to riot in favor of the death penalty, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." That's from Matthew 27, verse 24 to 25. So Pilate released Barabbas, a murderer and a terrorist, and after having Jesus beaten with a whip, he handed him over to the Roman soldiers to be nailed to the cross. Matthew 27, verse 26. O God, give us grace to accept the sufferings of the present time, confident of the glory which shall be revealed. From the collection for Wednesday and Holy Week, the Book of Common Prayer.
The second station, Jesus takes up his cross. Then the Roman soldiers took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole company around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they led him away to nail him to the cross. Matthew 27, 27 to 31. So the soldiers took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out of the city to a place called Skull. John 19, 16b to 17. The need to carry the cross expresses the reality that this is a process no one can complete for us. Each one must carry his or her own psychological burden, the burden of his or her own suffering. No other person, no institution, no religious system of salvation can do this for us. We must carry our own process and shoulder our own psychological burden of becoming conscious. John Sanford, Mystical Christianity, 1994, page 328.
Third station, Jesus falls. No wonder that he fell. Total exhaustion had set in. After supper with his friends the night before, they had walked to the Mount of Olives for the conversation with Peter about the difficult subject of Peter's betrayal. Later, they had gone to the garden called Gethsemane, where Jesus had suffered the anxiety of facing his destiny while the disciples slept. Here he had prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, let your will be done, not mine." Adapted from Matthew 26, verse 17 to 27.
Fourth station, Jesus meets his mother. Legend has it that Jesus encountered Mary, his mother, on the way to his execution. This is not unlikely in the small community of Jerusalem, since John's Gospel reports a conversation which took place later between Jesus, Mary, and the beloved disciple as Jesus hung on the cross. John 19, verses 25 to 27. O God, mercifully grant that we, walking in the way of the cross, may find it none other than the way of life and peace. From the Collect for Monday in Holy Week, the Book of Common Prayer.
Fifth station, Simon helps Jesus. The Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke agree that the soldiers forced another man to carry the cross to the place of execution after Jesus had become too weak to do so. As they led Jesus away, the soldiers seized a passerby who was coming in from the country. He was a man named Simon of Cyrene. They laid Jesus' cross on him and compelled him to carry it behind Jesus. Matthew 27:32, Mark 15:21, and Luke 23:26. A query for friends to consider today. What is the cross I feel compelled to carry?
Sixth station, Veronica helps Jesus. There is an ancient tradition that a woman named Veronica wiped the blood and sweat from the face of Jesus as he paused along the road. As soon as she stepped back, the bystanders saw that an image of the face of Jesus had been left upon the cloth. Another query for friends to think about. How has the image of the face of Jesus been imprinted upon my heart?
Seventh station, Jesus falls again. After having been condemned to death in 399 BCE, an Athenian philosopher, Socrates, addressed his jury of 500 citizens as fellows. The difficulty, my friends, is not to avoid death, but to avoid unrighteousness. Unrighteousness runs much faster than death. I am old and move slowly, and the slower runner has overtaken me. My accusers are keen and quick, and the faster runner. Unrighteousness has overtaken them. And now I go hence condemned by you to suffer the penalty of death. They too go their ways condemned by the truth to suffer the penalty of villainy and wrong. I must abide by my verdict. Let them abide by theirs. Plato, The Apology.
Eighth station, Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. A great number of people followed Jesus, and among them were women who were beating their breasts and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children." Luke 23, verses 27 to 28.
Ninth station. Jesus falls a third time. A Buddhist teacher from Tibet has said, "I think the best teaching is really suffering. As much as we can sensitively watch our own pain, this is the real teaching. Through much suffering we can understand. That's the only real source of effective teaching. Other ideas are just intellectual, but to have pain and to feel it, this is our raw material." Many people try to escape from pain and suffering, but I think escaping is really temporary. If a person has strength and courage, then it can be very helpful to look deeply into his or her own pain. When we watch our own suffering, we see a strange paradox. Even though we want to give it up, we are not ready. We hold tightly to our suffering. But if we can let go, then we automatically wake up, and our understanding becomes more clear. It can be very healthy to give up pain, and the key to this is watching our own suffering. Eventually, as we become more familiar with it, we decide that we don't want to suffer anymore. This internal change is the real learning process. But talking and reading are not enough. We must have direct experience. Suffering is raw truth. Books and words are often too conceptual. So as long as we have inner conflict, the most effective practice is to explore suffering until we become disgusted with it. When we change ourselves inwardly, we can see clearly the foolishness and countless self-tortures we have created for ourselves. But until we become aware of our own suffering, we cannot change.
Tenth station. Jesus is stripped of his clothing. When they came to a place called Skull, they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. Matthew 27, verses 33 to 34. And they cast lots to divide his clothing. Luke 23, 34b.
Eleventh station. Jesus is nailed to the cross. The soldiers nailed Jesus to the cross there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23, 33 to 34. The pain and torture of the crucifixion express the difficulty and painfulness of psychological and spiritual transformation. It is also of the nature of the cross that love must suffer. Jesus suffered because he loved. The women at the foot of the cross suffered because they loved. This consciousness of growth for which we strive is not achieved intellectually. It is not brought about simply by learning or psychologizing, but through loving as well, for it is love that is both beautiful and painful, that opens us up to a larger consciousness, and that finally merges with divine love. John A. Sanford, Mystical Christianity.
Twelfth station. Jesus dies on the cross. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Mark 15, verse 34. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." Luke 23, verses 46 to 47.
Thirteenth station. Jesus is taken down from the cross. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who was also a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. Matthew 27, 57 to 59. Our image of the triumphant risen Christ tends to blind our eyes to what can be for us the most helpful aspect of his way: the fact that he did not know what it was. He had to grope along the path and test every step, just as we do. There's an old phrase that it's worked out or solved in the walking. That is almost a definition of the way of the cross. But Jesus knew his way. The finality of his denial of human expectation is expressed in some instructions that he gave to his disciples near the end of the journey. Quote, "The kings of the pagans have power over the people. But this is not the way it is with you. Rather, the leader must be like the servant. Who is greater, the one who sits down to eat, or the one who serves him? The one who sits down, of course. But I am among you as one who serves." Luke 22, 25 to 27. And so he went his way to the very end. He lived out what was in him, reconciled its inner opposites, and took its outer consequences on that hill, on that cross. But as we know, that was not the end. Life broke through. It was not possible for death to hold him. Mary C. Morrison, The Way of the Cross, Pendle Hill pamphlet number 260.
Fourteenth station, Jesus is buried. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who had first come to Jesus by night, laid Jesus there. John 19, verses 41 to 42. On December 4th, 1964, in the solitude of his hermitage in the hills of Kentucky, Thomas Merton wrote, "How often in the last years I have thought of death. It has been present to me, and I have understood and known that I must die. Yet last night, only for a moment, in passing, without grimness or drama, I momentarily experienced the fact that I, this body, this self, will simply not exist. A flash of the not-there-ness of being dead. Without fear or grief, without anything, just not there. As if the angel of death passed along, thinking aloud to himself, doing his business, and barely taking note of me, but taking note of me nonetheless. So we recognized one another." Thomas Merton, A Vow of Conversation, page 108.
Fifteenth station. Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene and the other disciples. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had been lying. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned to him and said, "Teacher." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." John 20.1, 11 through 16, and 18 through 21a. If psychologically the death of Jesus on the cross, which we are bidden to emulate by carrying our own cross, is the death of our old egocentric personality, then the resurrection is the emergence of us, in us, of a new consciousness, rooted in the creative center within us. Part of the Christian mystery is about this deep inner transformation in which the old person dies and the new person lives through participation in a personality much larger than the ego. John Sanford, Mystical Christianity.
A final thought. The connection between commandment, love, obedience, and friends. Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. And I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." John 15, verses 12 to 17.
I'm glad you were able to join us for this. I hope you got something out of it. I'm Jeff Sluter, and the other voice you heard was my wife, Catherine. And I'd also like to thank Betsy Meyer, who is was a member of our Sandy Spring meeting, who was the one who originally took this this program to our meeting. Thank you.